New York voters only had one job, and they completely screwed it up. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes' Illuminati, the man who rules the world, takes on the head of the global elite in this all-new action-packed John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes' Illuminati in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Better get the cool slow, y'all, cause we're having us a barbecue. Zorhan Mamdami wound up becoming the 111th mayor of New York City on Tuesday. Now, the reason why this socialist candidate wound up beating the Blue Party candidate is all due to the entire Democratic Party here in New York City. Now, the Democratic Party here in New York City basically wound up making a series of mistakes that allowed this 33-year-old inexperienced candidate to wind up taking the position of mayor of New York City. Now, the start of these mistakes don't just start with Eric Adams, the previous mayor of New York City, who was installed by white supremacy to be the bumbling, stumbling black candidate who would clean up for the failures of Bill de Blasio. No, the real reason why Zorhan Mamdami wound up winning this election is because the entire Blue Party machine basically took its entire position for granted under the system of white supremacy. Now, in this whole system of white supremacy, there was a grand plan to go out here and have Eric Adams be a complete failure and hopefully get their great white savior in Andrew Cuomo to come in and clean up the mess. Unfortunately, Eric Adams and Bill de Blasio, the mayor before him, wound up making such a mess that the people in New York City decided not to choose their great white savior. No, they decided to go out here and choose this socialist candidate because they were so desperate for change. And that really shows how the Blue Party basically has completely lost the plot, and how the white supremacists who fund the Blue Party wound up losing the entire plot as related to their grandmaster plans, because they never expected this socialist candidate to wind up winning the position of mayor in New York City. No, they were desperately hoping they would be able to get white supremacy to go back to business as usual. Unfortunately, things were not going that way, and it was not going that way to the point where you had both the blue and the red party under white supremacy looking to endorse Andrew Cuomo. Unfortunately, Andrew Cuomo just was not the right candidate to go out here and take on Zorhan Mamdami. No, Andrew Cuomo basically was a candidate that the white supremacists wound up damaging due to allegations of sexual harassment. He was a man who wound up leaving the office of governor, which is higher than mayor, in an ignominious fashion due to a sexual harassment scandal, and had lost the favor of many voters as related to putting a lot of COVID patients around in nursing homes around senior citizens and leading to their deaths. And what the Blue Party hoped they would be able to do is go out here and grab this white man who basically had his reputation completely tarnished. Hope they could go out here and polish up this white man in Andrew Cuomo, clean him up, and then present him as the great white savior. Unfortunately, nobody wound up buying into the idea of Andrew Cuomo being any sort of great white savior. No, and that's where the white supremacists in this country basically wound up with a major case of egg on their face. And that case of egg on their face is all the Blue Party's own fault, because the Blue Party here in New York City has not been doing a good job of grooming the next generation of blue white male candidates. No, it has not been going out here to groom any candidates whatsoever. No, many of these baby boomers like Andrew Cuomo thought they would be able to go on forever. And I'll even throw in his predecessor, Charlie Rangel, who is currently resting in peace right now. I mean, many of these Blue Party candidates who came up in the 80s and the 90s didn't go out here and groom successors, and because they did not go out here and groom successors to take their place, this is why the Blue Party here in New York City and all across the country is a complete mess at this point. It's a complete mess at this point because this generation of politicians basically took their position in America for granted and thought they would be able to go on forever, and that all showed in the plan to go out here after the complete failure and debacle of Eric Adams, to think you could go out here and clean up Andrew Cuomo, take the tarnish off his reputation, and then look to run him as a viable candidate for mayor. Now that in and of itself was a stupid plan from day one, and this is just me coming off on my experience, again, as a guy who's lived in the city for 52 years. I mean, here you have a guy who basically is not going to even be able to get the white female vote, with him being a sexual harasser, and he's not going to be able to get the elderly vote after the COVID patients that were put into those nursing homes. So he's already lost part of the base. And then you have Eric Adams, who basically went out here and alienated the black vote. So here you have a candidate who basically has lost, again, 3 parts of a base that you desperately need, and the previous mayor has basically alienated the entire black vote all the way back in 2021 with a vaccine mandate that basically forced many New Yorkers like Ringo TV reactions to wind up leaving the city. I mean, basically, these Blue Party bosses made a complete mess. They made a complete mess of the entire system here, and they've been making a mess for a good, I'd say, about 20 to 30 years, even before this election. They basically wound up making a complete mess of everything, and now they're sitting here wondering how this thing happened with this socialist candidate winding up gaining momentum. Well, that candidate wound up gaining momentum because many of these boomers who were put in power basically did not understand that they needed to be getting ready to prepare their successors to take their place, and pushing their successors and getting those successors ready to take that position as related to the political offices that they were given authority over. That's what they were supposed to be doing, and there were viable candidates like Brad Landers, like Scott Stringer, but many of these Blue Party officials, they wanted to go for who they thought would be popular in Andrew Cuomo, but Andrew Cuomo's reputation was basically destroyed. Again, this man was destroyed by your own Blue Party as it was looking to make its first white female governor. They destroyed their white male governor, and that basically wound up derailing everything as related to white supremacy maintaining power. Again, these people basically, again, undermined themselves and were their own worst enemy in the Blue Party. And now they're looking at the whole thing of a socialist taking over as mayor. Again, a candidate who basically is not qualified for the position, very similar to the orange man that's currently in the White House. And basically, they're stuck with this candidate, and this candidate has major ramifications for the entire Blue Party all across the country. It has major ramifications because now the entire midterms are in jeopardy because you've got a complete idiot who wound up winning the office of mayor in New York City. An idiot who wound up winning because the people who again ran that Blue Party wound up taking their positions for granted. And this is one of the problems that I'm seeing as overall as the culture here in America. There's been a culture of complacency, and this culture of complacency is leading to a lot of people making decisions that are detrimental to the country. This is one of the things that I say about business that can't have a person in a position for too long, because what happens with that person is that those people who are in power winding up taking their positions for granted, similar to what's happening at Marvel Comics right now with guys like Tom Brevoort. Again, been in the position for too long, took his position for granted, doesn't really take it seriously anymore, no longer thinks that they have to compete. Same thing happened at Sears, where that whole business went from being a part of American culture to now being completely irrelevant, because you had people in charge for too long, and as those people stayed too long, they were not thinking forward about the future. No, they thought things were going to go on the same forever, and that's what's happened here with the Blue Party under the current leadership. They basically have become fractured at this point. They've become fractured where you've got a bunch of old politicians who have been sitting in their positions for too long with no vision whatsoever, and a bunch of young, ambitious individuals like AOC and Mamdami who have no experience and no real understanding of how things work, because they have not been mentored by seasoned veterans in the party. No, since they have not been given training by the seasoned people in the party and groomed for their positions, this is where we get these radical upstarts coming up. And these radical upstarts are out here with these crazy ideas like this socialist candidate, Mamdami, a guy, again, who basically has only been in office as an assemblyman for 3 years and has no real understanding of what it means to run a city of over 8 million people and billions of dollars in municipal services, nor does he have any understanding of how things work in this municipality as related to bureaucracy, nor does he even have an understanding of the city's budget or the state budget in and of itself. And this guy basically is a recipe for disaster, a complete recipe for disaster that will be of epic proportions, because the only thing that can happen in this case is, yeah, you're gonna get change, but it's not gonna be the kind of change that is going to be for the better. No, it's not going to be the kind of change that will be better for New Yorkers as related to affordability in the way they think. This is something I know from living in New York in the dark days of the 1970s and 1980s. Yeah, things are going to change, but it's going to change back to that incredibly dark time of the 1970s and 1980s, where we basically saw people leaving the city in droves because of the crime, because of the lack of investment, because the mayors that came at that time, the guys like Abe Beame, the Ed Kochs, they were out here doing the same things that Zorhan Mamdami is proposing, talking about raising taxes, which in and of itself is the stupidest thing you could do. Talking about raising taxes on the wealthy. Well, I was here for that in the 1970s and the 1980s, and that and the idea of putting all sorts of miscellaneous taxes wound up driving business straight out of New York City, wound up driving businesses straight out of New York City to the point where we have a lot of areas becoming retail ghost towns, and many big businesses like Toys R Us at the time, and many other businesses like Rite Aid and many others that aren't here anymore, didn't even think about coming to New York City not only because of the crime, but because of the bureaucratic red tape that was fostered by the Blue Party. I mean, this is the kind of stuff this socialist wants to propose as his new idea to make New York affordable. Well, I can tell you again, as someone who lived in New York in the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s, yeah, New York was really affordable at that time. And it was affordable because they had no business investment whatsoever. And with people leaving the city, again, at the time, basically the city became affordable because the landlords couldn't get anybody to rent that property. I mean, yeah, you could get an apartment for $300 a month in some places, but it was a slum because, again, these landlords weren't going to take care of that property whatsoever. weren't going to take care of that property because they basically had abandoned the property, and whatever happened at that property was just, again, the people just going through the motions. Again, the owners really didn't care at that time. That's how the city fell into disrepair in the 70s and the 80s. I mean, this is something that anybody who's been a veteran New Yorker understands. Yeah, we had a low rent at that time, but we had no investment. We had no businesses. People basically, they didn't want to come to New York. No, New York was a cesspool at the time, a cesspool of crime, a cesspool of unemployment, a cesspool that basically fell completely apart. And it looks like we're on a fast track to going back to that New York City under the what I know to be failed leadership of these mayors de Blasio, Adams, and now Mamdami, who are following the same pattern of Abe Beame, Ed Koch, and David Dinkins. I mean, sadly, history is repeating itself, and many New Yorkers are not even taking a critical look to see what direction they're going in. No, many New Yorkers aren't sitting there thinking, hey, we're heading down the same road that we headed down after John Lindsay left as mayor, and then we wound up with Abe Beame and Ed Koch and David Dinkins, who basically ran the city straight into the ground over a course of 20 years, and now you're on the same road with the same type of guys who basically come from the same party. And sadly, many New Yorkers can't connect the dots because many New Yorkers, like Ringo TV Reactions, left the city. The veteran New Yorkers, they left the city because they basically saw the handwriting on the wall. But these young dummies, basically, they're sitting there thinking they're going to get change, not understanding what change is coming to them. They don't understand what's coming to them because, again, they're young, they're inexperienced. They think, oh, we're going to make a new New York. No, that's what people thought in the 70s. Oh, we're going to make a new New York. And at the time, what happened is New York, you got a new York that basically was on the brink of collapse in the 70s due to a fiscal crisis because they, again, elected individuals who didn't understand the state of the state's finances. Just like right now, New York State is currently at a deficit right now, and New York City currently has a fiscal deficit, and you've got a mayor sitting here talking about raising taxes as related to a fiscal deficit, not seeing what happened in the 1970s when they implemented this plan, thinking, oh, the millionaires will pay to be a part of this city. No, what happened in the 1970s is that many of those millionaires packed up and went to Florida, made that their primary address, and many more decided to take their business out of New York and take it to other states like New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Virginia, and many others just decided to close their businesses altogether, and that led to the urban blight of the 1970s and 1980s. But many of these, again, youngsters never went out here and studied New York history, never understood New York history. No, all they did was get into their emotions about the whole prospect of getting free stuff and the prospect of getting things like free buses and getting all sorts of state-run stores that would have prices lower than the bodegas. Again, mind-bogglingly stupid ideas that basically are not economically viable, but these people, again, they were not people who were veteran New Yorkers, so they don't understand how things run in this state. I mean, everything that this Mamdami basically is proposing is not possible in any way, shape, or form of ever being something that can be made into policy. But these people sat here and believed that, oh, I can get the free stuff, not understanding the free stuff is not something that is in Mamdami's authority to even be able to provide. Now, because you had Mamdami, as he ran his campaign, talking about free buses in New York City. Now, anybody who lives here in New York City knows that the buses are run by the MTA and that the MTA is run by the state and Governor Kathy Hochul. And the MTA currently right now is running with a fiscal deficit. So that's why they're going to raise the fare to $3 after even getting the money from congestion pricing. They still are running with a deficit. So there's no way they can afford to give you any sort of free bus because it costs money to run these buses. It costs money to be able to pay the bus drivers. It costs money to be able to maintain that service. And it barely, they cannot even barely cover the cost, even with a $2.90 bus fare and millions of people every day hopping the bus and hopping the train. So you have a proposal made by this candidate that is never even feasible of being done, but you've got voters who basically believe this and thought, oh, I'm going to get free buses. No, you're going to get jack shit, plain and simple, as related to the buses. And this same candidate then goes on and says he's going to make things affordable in this city by, again, freezing the rent in something that he just can't do because, yes, the mayor puts members on the rent guidelines board, but the landlords also have their own members. And again, the rents here in New York, they are going to go up, and they usually go up every 1 to 2 years as related to the rent guidelines board. But you had people thinking, oh, he can freeze the rent. No, Mamdami does not have that authority over private property whatsoever, and he has no control over most of the city's private property as related to rent. Yeah, the Rent Guidelines Board controls the rent-controlled housing here in New York City, and the city also controls public housing, but you don't really want to live in the projects because the projects are hellholes where the property isn't maintained because the city basically just doesn't have the revenue coming in. But you can't explain that to many of these young, naive New Yorkers who, again, went out here believing these promises that Mamdami proposes. Mamdami proposed a lot of stuff that is just not possible to do, such as proposing, oh, he's going to be able to raise taxes. Well, again, taxes are out of his hands, and taxes are in the hands of the state legislature, and the state legislature in and of itself, they basically are up for re-election, and they ain't proposing to go along with no tax hikes. No, not with the state already in a fiscal deficit. No, they don't want to drive away many of the billionaires and millionaires as related to their business, and that's something that they don't want to do. But you had Mamdami making these promises that he knows he can't keep because he doesn't, again, have that authority. And anybody who ran for mayor would understand this, but this guy didn't really know anything. But I have to ask the critical question, who's stupider in this case? The people, Zorhan Mamdami, for his stupid proposals, or the people who went out here and voted for him? That's the critical question I've got to ask about New Yorkers who continue to fumble the ball by continuing to go out here and elect candidates who don't act in their best interest. I mean, I sat there and was scratching my head a year before about the re-election of Kathy Hochul. Again, a woman who basically shows me she's just not fit to be governor of New York and has basically made the state worse than it is. I mean, she basically came within a hair's breadth of losing to Lee Zeldin, but they only wound up winning because of the people of New York City. Again, the same people of New York City went out here and elected Eric Adams. Again, a man who was just shown to be completely incompetent. And instead of looking to get change in any way, shape, or form, they go out here and elect someone even worse. So I have to wonder what's going on with the people in New York, here in New York City. I mean, are you stuck on stupid? Are you stuck on dumb the way your grandfathers were when they went out here and picked Abe Beame, went to 3 terms of Ed Koch, and then a term of David Dinkins? I mean, are you on the same stuck on stupid? Again, that's related to picking incompetent candidates, that all you do is vote blue no matter who, and don't think about the consequences of your actions. I mean, this is what I've got to wonder about people in New York City who, again, supposed to be the most educated, most supposed to be the brightest bulbs, but I'm seeing how, like the late David Carroll say, about black men, about how they're not the sharpest knives or the brightest bulbs. New York voters don't seem to be very smart, don't seem to be as bright or sophisticated, that you buy into the promises of an individual who basically can't deliver on the goods, and then 2 to 3 years later sit there and will be saying Zorhan is a moron, and not seeing how you're the ones making these decisions. Again, no different than black women who go out here and pick Pookie, no different than the black women who go out here and get involved with Pookie and all the other assorted losers in her life, making all sorts of bad choices, but then want to sit there and say they want change, but don't see how they are part of it, don't want to see how they're a part of making these bad decisions that wind up leading them into this hole in and of itself. Now, when I look at, again, this whole situation, again, I look at it as not only these New York voters not being smart, but I also look at it, again, I'll go back to that whole thing with the Blue Party, again, taking their position for granted in this country. Again, what I'm seeing here as related to the Orange Man becoming the president and Mamdami becoming the mayor of New York City is, again, people so polarized as related to politics, and this all started with Obama's election, and again, that polarization has them going out here and, again, voting for candidates based on feelings, not on policy, voting for candidates on their feelings, not thinking critically about what can be done for them, because they basically have taken their country for granted, and that's something that basically these younger voters have learned from their baby boomer parents, who, again, are now the age of these politicians, and thought, hey, we can go out here and basically run a guy like Andrew Cuomo. That's what has me scratching my head. You had Brad Landers, you had Scott Stringer, but again, those guys didn't have good interpersonal skills, which is a big problem with the Blue Party. Again, they sit there and say it's messaging. No, it's the fact that your guys don't have people skills. It's the fact that they don't know how to talk to people. This was a problem I saw with Hillary Clinton when she was running for office. Didn't know how to talk to people and present their position. Yeah, they know how to talk to rich donors and billionaires, but they don't know how to talk to the average everyday American. The average everyday American who here in New York is about to see their quality of life go to complete shit. Because it's going to be just as bad as the 1970s and 1980s, because you've gone out here and elected a candidate who will not be able to do anything for you, and even worse, if we have a situation like a Superstorm Sandy, a 9/11, or a World Trade Center bombing, if we have a crisis go on in this city, sadly, this man will not be mentally equipped to be able to handle it. No, he won't be able to handle that whole situation. And sadly, many New Yorkers will basically learn this as this guy falls apart and crumbles like tissue paper. Because again, a 33-year-old guy who was never really had any sort of political experience, no experience in public administration, no real experience in anything, he's going to fall apart like many of the so-called, what they call woke writers that work at Marvel Comics, who can't put a book together. Again, when you go out here and have an inexperienced individual, this person, all they can do is fail because they don't know how anything works. And what's even worse is that if he fails miserably, what will happen is we don't have anybody to replace him, because we've got Pookie in the guy who's supposed to replace him in I forget his name, but he's supposed to be the public advocate, and he's not anybody who I would trust with leadership. I mean, he basically was standing with migrants instead of New Yorkers, and I forget what his name is, but the whole thing is you've got a lot of incompetent people in office. But what's even sadder is that many New Yorkers basically are oblivious to this point because they basically, many of them are recent transplants. Many of them never lived in this city as long as I have to understand. You got to be careful about who you elect, because electing the wrong candidate can take us back to the dark days of the 1970s and 1980s. But sadly, many of these people never lived through those hard times. They never lived through that nightmare of that time. I mean, as someone who was a kid who rode the train and went to Park West High School, where there was a porno theater outside of the train station that I would get out of as related to the C train. And that was so bad that I just decided to go over to Rockefeller Center and start taking the train from there, because that area was so seedy in Hell's Kitchen. Now that area is now a lavish area filled with luxury apartments, but I remember when that was a complete hellhole at one time, and they were building the Worldwide Plaza building at the time, and I remember that time in 1987, again, when the city was seedy. And I remember being in IS 148 and going down to that area with our class on class trips. I mean, many of these people never lived in that New York, but many of them will possibly see the city turn into that New York once again. And it's all due to many New Yorkers not really understanding things, taking their life for granted, and taking their city for granted. That's how we wound up in this hellhole state of New York, actually, in the 70s and the 80s. Basically wound up in a hellhole state because many New Yorkers basically, again, took their lives for granted. And again, with these baby boomers, they basically have taken this country for granted, and have taken this country for granted nationwide, and have basically run everything straight into the ground. And that's the sad fate that's coming to New York over the next 4 years. We're going to see the city basically fall completely apart, and sadly it will be all due to the fault of we the people, because the whole thing is that when you have people who have it too good, they don't appreciate anything. They have not worked for anything. They don't know what struggle is. And when you don't know what struggle is, basically you go out here and take everything you have for granted until you wind up with absolutely nothing. Now, if you want to see me make other videos, you can drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to pick up some of my books on the SJS Direct Imprint, you can find those books at Amazon.com and other online booksellers. And you can pick up those books at other retailers like Drafted Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, A Thorn in My Side. The man who rules the world takes on an agent from the CIA from the Black Way in this all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes' A Thorn in My Side in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Esteemed Season of the Witch Girl. The aspiring angel takes on a wicked teenage witch in this action-packed, all-new Esteemed series adventure. Pick up your copy of Esteemed Season of the Witch Girl in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.